this technology existed.
Well, this very definitely. I've heard stories that what they'd done. I don't add much credence to this. That what they tested in North Africa was the atmospheric bomb. Which is propane gas that's exploded, and there's a second detonation. And these things are very close to nuclear power, but
almost like an air fuel bomb.
Yeah, air fuel bomb, what they call an atmospheric bomb. That's not what they tested. I don't believe that. They went down to North Africa to test this, and they covered it up by saying that they were fighting a delaying action, because from the time, and I don't remember what year it was, that Hitler transferred 15 mobilized units from the Western Front to open a new front or from the Eastern Front to open a new Western Front. The generals knew from that time on that it was just a matter of time before the war was lost, and everything was a delaying action from that time on. And that's at that point is when they sent Rommel to North Africa, which is ridiculous because that's just definitely out in left field. Why would he go down to North Africa to test the neutron bomb? To test weapons they couldn't test anywhere else.
Yeah, what were they there to do? Capture some land?
Sure.
Some nice desert land?
And the whole thing is, there's already documentation to back this up that the Germans were making several attempts to bomb New York City. That was a big fixation, I think. And some of these battles actually occurred within eyesight of land. Now, there was one case where I think they called it the April attack, where they sent something like 5 submarines. It might have been 5, might have only been 3. I don't recall right at this moment. And there was a carrier 12 miles away from this submarine. When the submarine was finally hit, it set off an explosion which rocked the carrier 12 miles away.
So apparently there was something pretty explosive on that.
Yeah, carriers don't rock very easily.
What I'd like to show now is a photograph which comes from the book Vengeance. I guess we didn't mention that the fact that the Japanese and the Germans were still allies at this point. And what we're looking at here are 2 Japanese submarines. These are the world's largest submarines in the world at this time. They carried aircraft on them, and they also carried all of the material to make nuclear weapons in their cargo. The book also goes into detail. It gives you a list of the material that they were shipping to Japan, back and forth from Japan, basically, which could be used for nothing else but the making of nuclear weapons. And again, this author feels that this was, in fact, their intention.
Well, they found one large sub in Indonesia, a German sub. They captured a German sub carrying a large shipment of mercury to Japan. And so it indicated that the Japanese were getting ready to build red mercury neutron bombs, and the Germans were assisting them. I'll give you an example of how we're lied to. If you ask anyone at Los Alamos when the first nuclear explosion was detonated in the United States, they will tell you that it was the Trinity Site explosion. But the fact of it is the first nuclear explosion detonated in America that I know of was on the Sacramento River in California. It was a Navy test.
How is that possible?
They did it. They did it in the Sacramento River, and they even filled a ship full of sailors, what some people think were sailors. Actually, what they did is they had the military police go out on the streets of San Francisco and round up all the zoot suiters they could find, and there were 400 of these people put on one of these ships and used in this nuclear test on the Sacramento River. And they set off a nuclear detonation in the Sacramento River at a place called Port Chicago, California.
Now, were there eyewitnesses to this test? I mean, we're
sure.
talking about Sacramento.
Yeah. Well, it was a witness. There were plenty of witnesses. How do they shut all those people up? I don't know. All I know is they do it. That's a big question. How do you get that many people to shut their mouths?
I guess back at the period of time we're talking about, it's a little more, probably a little easier. There were probably a whole lot less people that we're talking about. We're not talking millions.
Yeah, they took. It was a Navy conducted test. They had a lot more power in those days than they do now. They could clear the area of people, a lot easier than they would now, and people would obey them without.
And where does this information come from?
I am trying to remember the name of the man who first exposed this, but the information dovetails with the information that I know about the shore patrol rounding up Zoot Suiters. I know 3 people who were in the shore patrols that rounded up the Zoot Suiters that were used in the test. And I thought they just took them down and shot them on the beach. The justification for rounding up the Zoot Suiters was that they were molesting the wives of soldiers and sailors who were fighting the war.
Are we talking about the same event that they actually made a movie out of called Zoot Suit, where there was a confrontation between Navy sailors and Zoot Suiters?
I'm sure there were plenty of those.
Talking about?
It was probably the same period of time. I haven't seen the movie. I've heard of the name of this movie. Did they show something about
yes,
mass killings and stuff?
I don't think so. I'm just talking about as far as confrontation between.
There was definitely
Zoot
some
Suiters
confrontations going on.
Yeah.
And
it's an interesting subject to turn into a musical of all things. But the fact that
wouldn't be such a pretty musical if the truth were really known.
Absolutely.
That they rounded them up and used them in a nuclear test in the Port Chicago test, and that was before the Trinity site. So the truth about it is the first explosion wasn't at Port Chicago. What is appalling to me is that they ever tested a nuclear weapon in the open air in the continental United States. I can't believe they did it.
Well,
and they were still doing it.
They were probably so ignorant of the after effects of such a thing.
Oh, certainly. They didn't know anything about radiation.
Right.
You
And this was their way to find out. Maybe we'd like to talk a little bit about early vintage disinformation. What pops into my head? Some place around here called Roswell. You had an interesting chapter in your book about Roswell. Could you explain a little bit about that?
Well, when I was a boy, after World War II, you couldn't get building materials. It was all on a priority because of the war and so forth. GIs had certain priorities that they could get houses, under the GI Bill and whatever. But since we lived in the West Texas town of Kermit, we couldn't get building materials. My father bought the POW camp at Roswell, where they held Rommel's prisoners during the war. What a coincidence. And so hauled that down to Kermit, and we built a house and a store building and some apartments. Had the first motel there. And housing was there was such a shortage of housing, we had people driving to Kermit to have a place to sleep at night from as far away as Silver City. We had one family that owned a copper mine in Silver City that drove all the way to Kermit, and they would sleep in 24-hour shifts while half the family ran the mine. But anyway, we had connections in Roswell. We had friends there, and we had made trips up there. My father played golf, and I'd gone up there as a caddy when I was just a child, carrying this huge golf bag in these horrible hot weather. I mean, it was grueling. But I saw flying discs at a distance, and I had talked to oil field pumpers who, at that time, that area was just remote. It was hardly anybody living there. It was just a lonely, open expanse down there. And so, the flying saucers were being seen after the war because they brought all these Germans in these ships down there to Alamogordo. Roswell wasn't really a flying saucer base. It was an atomic bomb wing, and at one time had the Enola Gay there before they moved it.
Here we have on the screen here an early article talking about scores of saucers over the northwestern New Mexico oil town of 5,000 population.
Yeah, everyone was seeing these things. Now, so they had to create a scam to convince everybody that these things weren't government ships, even though everybody at first said, well, these are some of those Germans over there at Alamogordo or Fort Bliss or White Sands. That's where these things are coming from. So they created this thing, the intelligence personnel, and I don't believe the ones at Roswell even cooked it up. I believe the ones at Alamogordo did it. They had intelligence, they had guys from the Gestapo over there who had done this same thing in Germany during the war. So they took rhesus monkeys that they were using on the rocket sled to test for acceleration. They had G-suits on these little monkeys, and they had to shave these little monkeys. There were leaks. Their security wasn't as good as they thought, But they also showed newsreels at the movies that showed the rocket sleds with the monkeys on them in 1946.
And you feel that a lot of this stuff is rare now as far as these kind of monkeys for a reason?
Well, they used the rhesus monkeys in their early research, and then they switched to chimpanzees because the rhesus monkeys were probably harder to control. But they were short-tailed East Indian monkeys. And however, my brother-in-law's aunt was the nurse at Roswell, who was present when they brought these monkeys in from this hoax. That's not too much different than the one I saw that I had a photograph of.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a minute.
And that's interesting. That's very similar. It's amateurish. You can see rivets and stuff on there.
Absolutely. Anyway, finish your story about the rhesus monkey, and we can continue.
Anyway, my brother-in-law's aunt was in the Bataan Death March, so she was in the Bataan Peninsula during World War II. She had eaten rhesus monkeys because that's what they had to eat in that part. They had to eat the rhesus monkeys and green chili. They had their own version of green chili, which she was used to since she was grown up in New Mexico. And after the war, after she was liberated from the camp, she came back to New Mexico and worked as an Army nurse at Roswell Army Airfield. And she grew up in Mescalero. You see, Mescalero was where Goddard's laboratory was. His test range was at Eden Valley. So my brother-in-law's aunt and her sister, Leona, wouldn't have missed a German count, 21 years old, who was in town for 2 years. You don't think those teenage girls would not notice that German count who was unmarried, who was handsome and debonair and all that stuff? So they knew about von Braun's presence in New Mexico. However, Leona had told me, and laughingly, how silly it was when they brought those monkeys in that Roswell hoax and commenced to do a dissection of the monkey as if they were dissecting an alien, because she knew it was a rhesus monkey all along. She later became a nun, and she's still a nun now. But she was the one that Glenn Dennis talks about.
Now, was this connected to Walter Haut? Did they just continue to
Walter
push
Haut was the PIO, so he sent photographs out when they made that announcement about the alien ship that had crashed at Roswell. Now, here's a PIO who is an intelligence officer, sends out information about an alien ship and sends photographs, and it shows the aliens, which are really rhesus monkeys in G-suits. He sends them out to the area newspapers and a picture of a little flying saucer, which they'd fabricated because intelligence procedures wouldn't permit them to show a picture of a real saucer because that would be a violation of security. So they created a phony little funny book-looking little bubble on the top, and they put an auto antenna on the top, and they sent these out to the area newspapers. But then the Pentagon found out about it, hit the ceiling, and sent in people to retrieve all those photographs. Well, 2 of those photographs ended up in Lovington, New Mexico, in an old newspaper office in a back room in a dusty old drawer. A newsman found them there and gave them to me. And I had them for, I guess, a couple of years before they were stolen from me. And they were stolen by a lady who lived with Jacques Vallée, the ufologist.
Oh, Mr.
And they've never been published, so that tells you that the CIA got the photos back.
Yeah, here's Jacques Vallée that's going to give us all the good information, and he doesn't open his mouth about that one, huh?
Electrocraft. Yeah, that's some phony.
Here's another phony riveted UFO for our perusal here.
Yeah, they get a bunch of guys that that nothing's going to be, they're not going to show anything classified. It's supposed to look